But what happens when we're actually dancing into it with intention? Because now we're speaking to that other thing that nobody speaks to, intention. To intentionally be able to ground oneself to say, okay, I know that when I go into this, because I've done the work to understand myself, most people say they understand other people, but they don't even know themselves, because all they're doing is giving of themselves what they wish someone would have given to them. So when I ask why and why is it fulfilling to them, people can't even ask you what fulfilling is. I ask them what their definition of happy is, they don't know. I ask you, okay, if you could replicate that one special moment, you take that one moment you experienced when you were like, oh my gosh, this was amazing. What would your life, how different would your life be if you could replicate it in every waking breath you took?
Does that speak to maybe happiness not being a point, but a process,
it's a point of origin.
Right.
So then you can steer from it. You can build on it. So then all of a sudden, people are now saying, oh, you know, I don't know how many people I see randomly out here running. And they're like, man, what do? You out here skate? What else you do? What else you do? And I'm like, oh, I'm a cognitive coach and I am a human movement specialist. So, you know, this is what I do. I go, what do you do? You're a cognitive coach. What's that? I go, well, I go, what do you like about running? He goes, it's a place for me to turn my brain off. I can relax. I feel like I'm just at peace. And I go, what would your life look like if you could replicate that moment every day in your life? He goes, oh my God, I've never thought about that before. That'd be amazing. And that's when I realized, yeah, that's what it looks like when people aren't even thinking past that moment. Because they're finding ways to cope, not ways to grow. I know we have all these self-help books out there.
Right.
So we have these self-help books out there that are speaking to all these things. And it's like, oh, this is great. This is great. But, you know, let's go deeper than that. What is going to challenge people to open, and what I tell people is, what does life look like if you gave yourself permission to think different? Because that's the only way you're going to change. If nobody gives themselves permission to think different, or at least entertain a thought or an idea for at least a minute of their life, they will never see the change they're looking for.
And do you think that the impulse is related to the ego and sort
Absolutely, 100%.
You know, people, you know, have their ideas influence like who they're associated with, and then if they change their ideas, the people they're associated with might not like them anymore.
Well,
might think differently about them.
Like. That's exactly what that looks like, because people surround themselves around people who affirm who they are. So essentially, when somebody starts to grow, it's the thing of, do I grow with someone, or do I grow with people, or do I outgrow? Because I don't know how many people I've watched in their lives see change, and then all of a sudden they're like, man, certain people I don't talk to anymore.
And that's a scary thing.
Absolutely.
It's a real scary thing for a lot of people.
And that's the thing that I learned, is when you're consciously living, it's a lonely road, but you'll never be lonely because you'll know exactly why. You know, because then you get to cultivate and co-create relationships. Because that's not what people are talking about either. People are, if you take Walt Disney, okay, Walt Disney was, you know, is one of the things that brainwashed people. Because they had this ideal that I have to find happiness from all these other things, and it has to be this way, so that when they actually found a relationship, nobody said that, hey, when you go into a relationship, you might have 2 or 3 core values that align, but if you want to go deeper than that to create this thing called love and pure love, it would actually mean that you'd have to feel safe around it. Because people didn't realize that, hey, and love is not something you just automatically feel. If you don't feel safe with somebody, you're not going to feel love. And that's a presupposition that anybody can debate it to the gills, but ask anybody who says they love somebody and they don't feel safe.
Right.
It's not going to happen, and that's what we get to. So when we take all these other ways, what are other ways that we're brainwashed? Society, you say, well, where did it start? And everything that we see on TV. And every narrative that you see on TV, why do you think dramas and General Hospital stayed in business for so long? Okay, because everybody was watching that, and they're like, oh my God, there's so much drama. But that's what people thrive on. You know, you take X-Men, right? Do you know what X-Men was about?
Well, I've seen the movie. I saw one of the movies, but
Okay.
I don't know.
Do you know what the characters were based on? Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. Xavier was Martin Luther King, and Malcolm X was Magneto. That's why Magneto's like, they don't love you. They don't care about you. Why do you think they're doing this? And Martin Luther King, you gotta show them love. Xavier's like, you gotta show them love. You gotta be compassionate. That's what it was based off of.
I never heard that before.
Right?
I'll look into that.
Right? So this is the stuff that, like, if people were like looking at it, everything is hiding in plain sight. And here we are, distracted by everything we see on TV.
Yeah.
Because people are distracted away from going into themselves. So when this quarantine hit, it actually started to wake people up in a sense of where they started questioning more And when it started to become a thing about worrying about their mortality, I started asking people, what would you be afraid of if you were to die now? You know, I realized, well, people say, well, how did you get to the point where you're not worried about death? Well, because I faced suicide and I was ready to die. But what I learned about suicide is it's not selfish. Because I found peace that no one else would ever tell me about, and I was able to let go of all the childhood stuff that, you know, my mom had in this, and having all this stuff here, and now I'm showing my mom something she never experienced before because I stopped assuming the role of a child every time I saw my parents.
I want to go back to the COVID for a second, if you would. Like, so when that first started, I remember like late February, thinking and talking to people about how, you know, maybe this will be a thing that will allow us to bridge some divides, you know, some political divides where we all have this common enemy, say, or problem that we all need to figure out and get past. And you know, that lasted about a week maybe, and then it became apparent that that was not going to be the case at all. In fact, it was going to sharpen a lot of those divides.
Exactly.
And I wonder if you might speak on that a little bit.
Absolutely. So if you take in the realm of this COVID, I just happened pre-COVID. I had just did 4 years of intensive work, where we're talking like I worked through my childhood, and I didn't have the professional help because professional help was pissing me off. They would approach it, let you talk, but nobody's sitting there challenging to go deeper. So I'm like, okay, the DSM, if we get into the, I don't want to go on a tangent of DSM models or psychology in that world, but I'll tell you like this, there's a lot of things happening there.
Yeah.
But when this COVID hit, I realized that people were struggling and they were fighting to hold on to what their normal was, because now we're speaking to that identity crisis. A lot of people stake their worth, their own personal worth, because now I don't remember exactly what we got, but we got your worth, we got our, you know, our impact, and you know, everybody's operating from a different core. Like you know, if you're nurturing, then that's what your thing is. If you want to see people be successful, that's your thing. Like everybody has their thing that aligns to their core of their actual spiritual identity. Well, a lot of people stake their identity on their worth with their jobs, so that when their jobs went away, they had to actually go in and redefine their worth. And people felt lost. People didn't know what to do. Okay, what am I doing when my identity was staked on this, and now I don't have that? Where am I going to go with myself? And then all of a sudden, you know, school teachers that love their job are sitting there where their worth has now been impacted, and now they can't even do it the way they wanted to, because the reason they became teachers is because they wanted to make impact. And now
that's really interesting.
So they've been they've been taken away from that. So now, the one distraction that people had that kept them from thinking and working on themselves was their jobs. But see, that was the part of this whole hierarchy and how this economy ran. It wasn't like if we had free trade, it'd be a different kind of world. Let's be real. If people could trade in all these different ways, how different would the world be? But no, everybody had to find a way to make money. But then all of a sudden, businesses had to find a way to make money. So things started getting shipped around. So you couldn't really make a job. So you got stuck in this paradoxical dilemma of just this rabbit thing. So when the jobs went away, people were sitting there, and for the first time they had to talk to their family. And all of a sudden, they realized, I don't know what we're talking about. All of a sudden, kids were asking more questions. Parents didn't have answers. So then all of a sudden, people actually had to start acknowledging each other. So then when people started acknowledging each other, it became this other thing now, where now when people are talking about divide and talking about being together, well now when all these things started happening and people had nothing but time on their hands, and they started seeing people dying on TV, they started seeing people losing their jobs, they started seeing jobs getting imported out. I mean, people literally started losing their mind. And then it became this thing of, my identity of who I am is I'm Christian. My identity of who I am is I'm a CEO. My identity of this is this. All that stuff was stripped away, and now people are trying to redefine themselves.
Yeah, and you saw it, one of the side effects of the COVIDs and the lockdown, you know, and I think this ties in with what you're saying about identity is, you know, that loss of sense of identity, and you saw this like real sharp uptick in drinking and spousal abuse and you know, all these sort of self-harming things that are, you know, perhaps tied to a loss of that sense of self and ego and whatnot.
Absolutely. So now people are coping with their unhealthy spectrum. Because you can think about it, people's jobs was probably their healthy way of coping.
Right.
Probably the healthiest way they could cope. And now they have to acknowledge those shadows that have never been acknowledged, and their entire life has been spent doing a certain thing. Yeah, people are freaking out right now.
Yeah.
You know, so that when all of a sudden, when BLM happened, and then all of a sudden the counter to that was all lives happened. But then the counter to that was blue lives happened.
Right.
And then the thing about the people saying all lives matter, and the people saying blue lives matter was the all lives matter people were sitting there, and I'm like, if all lives matter, then why did women have to fight a 100-year battle to get equal rights, and they're still not equal? All of a sudden, people wanted to be included in what was happening, and that's what it looked like. So it became this psychological war where back and forth they were going through and going through and going through, and then it's like, okay, well, look at the Blue Lives Matter. Okay, why were teachers saying Blue Lives Matter? When the thing about the funding and how things went from schools to police funding and then defunding the teachers and education, okay, well, what about teachers? Teachers' lives matter. Because now all of a sudden, if we're speaking to crime and the parallel to that, it comes down to a thing of ignorance. Okay, if people aren't being educated in a way, and we're going into the social breakdown of actually saying, okay, what's it look like to put our defense in our first line, which is our youth, how much would that impact society? That's not what they're talking about. You know, because it's this thing about money and this and that, but nobody's talking about the essence of actual thought. If people could express critical thinking, they started to talk about it a little bit. You know, people got to think a little deeper. Okay, well, what is critical thinking if people don't even know themselves? And parents are sitting there just literally, parents raising kids. I'm one of them. You know, here I was, I got 12 and a 16-year-old, and now I'm going backwards to do things. This 4 years of growth was in tribute to a family that I watched fall apart because I had a woman that loved the crap out of me, but I didn't know how to receive love because I saw it as a form of manipulation.
Right.
So now I'm doing things different. So it becomes this whole thing now where we look at it. Yeah, that's exactly why everything's, you know, kind of been, you know, if you think about the breakdown in the communities, it becomes this linguistic dynamic struggle. And then it also becomes this thing about people having a spiritual struggle because the spiritual identity is speaking to the core.
Right.
Okay, speaking to the core what it is, and then how do you replicate that on the inside and live it outwardly?
Right. So I'm going to make this the last one, but last question. But so in tying all that together with, you know, what we're talking about since the COVID and the loss of identity, and it does, maybe it seems to you as well that one sort of coping mechanism that we're seeing in such a heightened, exacerbated way in comparison to times past is like the, you know, with the election coming up in 4 days. And I think a lot of people sort of maybe took their loss of identity and put it into like the political sphere.
Exactly.
And so just tell me like what you think is going to happen in the next like 2 weeks or so, like.
So this is
and at least in relation, because that will also force people to confront their identity again. Absolutely. Depending on what the outcomes are, you know.
Absolutely, and that's a good one because the one thing that I'm going to speak to my personal self and then speak to the world. What I learned is if you don't know yourself and really know yourself to the point where you can express freedom of thought from the core, that's not trying to prove worth through trying to push it onto somebody else. When the world goes to hell in a handbasket, you will become a slave of the system. Because freedom of thought is the one thing that people don't really express to the capacity that it can be.
Do you think most people want to have freedom of thought?
People don't know what they don't know. So if they didn't know that their lives could be completely turned around and they can have much more fulfillment because of what they didn't know and the place that if people were living from a place of volition, meaning free will, then yeah, you know, I think people would want to be a part of it more, but if they don't know what they don't know. So because of that, would we say that would they want to know? If they don't know what they don't know, then they're going to hold on to what they do know, and therefore they're going to push away all the opportunities that lie on the horizon because it gives them that emotional trigger of all the things tied to their childhood that speaks to uncertainty that they never want to feel again. And it goes very back to people don't want to feel it again. They know what they don't want, and they know what they do want, but that's why they give it to each other, but they don't even give it to themselves. And the ones that do give it to themselves, that's why they got all the money, because that's how they stake their worth and identity. Take that stuff away, what do they got? So with the current time, with the elections and where it's at, what I know right now is I cannot get distracted in what the world will do once it happens, because it's all going to be a matter of how I choose to respond to the people around me. Because if I choose to fixate myself on the outcome of people, I will get lost and become a part of that same system of emotional slavery. So it becomes that thing of, I believe a lot of people are going to be in a place where they're going to need help. There's going to be a lot of pain. I believe there's going to be a lot of loss. There's going to be a lot of grief. And at that point in time, it's going to become a thing of, what are people going to do something different? And who are the people going to be out there that are going to be the ones sought after? I didn't know I was going to make a career out of what I'm doing. I'm not even asking for a lot of money. I mean, people will pay $500 to $100,000 an hour to have a conversation. I didn't know that was a thing. Okay, because people.
Maybe I should put a price on here.
What I'm telling you is, I was actually looking at doing a thing to come out here and just do like a complimentary, like, coach thing. Give a topic, have somebody put a topic, and then have a group of people talk, and then have an open forum where people talk. But I'd be able to, like we talk about the elephant in the rider, I'd be able to kind of mitigate all of them, so that they all walked away with something that they had to gnaw on for the next few weeks. And it might change their life, because the ripple effect, the butterfly effect, is a very real thing.
Right.
And to put one thing out, it will change the world if people are intentional in what they're doing. So if you're taking what you're doing right now, I'm excited about it, because I know of what I've spoken in there. You get to go through that stuff and process it through. The Easter eggs that you'll get out of that are going to be the things that's going to change somebody else's life if it doesn't change yours personally.
Yeah.
But I know that for a fact. But that's the life I'm living.
All right, Brian, I think that's a beautiful place to end right there.
There you
yeah,
go.
that was great.
Yeah.
Right on, man. I'm glad you stopped.
Oh yeah, man. I'm glad I stopped there.
Yeah.
So what are your plans? What are you doing? What's your project?